Hey everybody, Tyler from the Warehouse Podcast here to drop a quick note in before the start of this episode. As you can tell from the title, this is all about the starting rotation, and Jesse does a great job here of kind of breaking down where things stand for the Orioles following the Corbin Burnes trade. Unfortunately for Jesse, he recorded this the night before we found out about the injuries to Kyle Bradish and John Means, and now as I'm recording this little preamble, we don't know that much about the injuries. Just to catch everybody up, Kyle Bradish has a UCL injury that we've known about, or the Orioles have known about for a few months now. He's received PRP injections, and he is starting to throw now. The Orioles have already said he's going to start the year in the IL. They don't exactly know when he's going to pitch, but the things are pointing in the right direction. And then as for John Means, his injury history has been a little murky the last year and a half, 2 years. Came back from the Tommy John, pitched okay, actually pretty well. Not a ton of strikeouts, but the numbers, the high level numbers were pretty good. But then missed out on the ALDS due to another injury. Sounds like the Orioles told him to slow play his ramp up to the 2024 season, and now he's about a month behind the other pitchers. So Brandon Hyde said he'll pitch in April, but we'll believe it when we see it, sort of situation. So obviously, if either one of those two misses significant time, then the Orioles rotation doesn't look nearly as good as we thought it did just a few weeks ago, which is a real bummer. And that opens up the normal question, or the rational question of what are they going to do then? Are they going to address it by trading for somebody? Are they going to sign Blake Snell, Jordan Montgomery? We've already heard rumors about them being interested in Jesus Luzardo. Who knows? We've got another month and a half between now and opening day, so you'd expect the Orioles to do something, but as we record, we don't really know about that. And when Jesse recorded his episode here, he didn't even know about the injuries. So please enjoy today's episode with the understanding that Jesse was operating in a time before we knew of these unfortunate injuries to Bradish and Means. And, maybe they're not as big of a deal as we think they are right now. And in that case, then let's travel back to just a few days ago and be in the ignorant bliss that Jesse got to record this in, thinking that the Orioles had an elite rotation on opening day, which doesn't quite feel that way anymore. But anyway, just wanted to give that context. Enjoy the show. Give us a like, follow, subscribe, all that jazz. And talk to you later.
Welcome back to the Warehouse Podcast. My name is Jesse. I'm going to be the solo host for this episode today, and I'm going to be talking about the Orioles starting rotation. Of course, this is a major point of excitement for Oriole fans this upcoming year, in addition to the Orioles just expecting and hoping to be really good this year. The addition of Corbin Burnes has accelerated the excitement of Oriole fans, and accelerated excitement in particular of this starting rotation. We had a top half of the rotation last year. And with the addition of Corbin Burnes and hopefully some other positive factors that will be influencing the Orioles starting rotation in a positive direction, the Orioles can really take this starting rotation to the next level to just become dominant this upcoming year in 2024. So I'm going to be getting into basically how good I expect this rotation to be, who I expect to be in the starting rotation on opening day for 2024. And yeah, what I think we can expect as Oriole fans and what we can hope for. Assuming health, I think it's fairly certain heading into opening day what our rotation will be. I feel pretty strongly that it is going to be Corbin Burnes, Kyle Bradish, Grayson Rodriguez, John Means, and Dean Kramer. And I'll get into why. Obviously, the first three names, Burnes, Bradish, and Rodriguez, don't really need any defense or explanation as to why they are going to be in the rotation. I think basically all Oriole fans can agree on that. However, I'm also very confident in Means and Kramer being the 4 and 5 starter. So just to start off with Means, why I feel very confident he'll be the 4. Just simply, he has too much upside to not give a legitimate chance to in the rotation for the upcoming year. Obviously, John Means used to be the Orioles ace of the rotation. And if he can replicate something like his 2019 or 2021 season, he would be an outstanding number four starter for us. Of course, what a number one, what a number two, what a number three starter is varies a little bit. Sorry, a number one starter on a bad team is going to be a number three starter on a really good team. Grayson Rodriguez, who's going to be our three, would certainly be some aces, or at least number twos, throughout some of the league. So they're not firm definitions as to what each of these, what a number two or what a number four, et cetera, is. But if John Means returns to form, and he can sort of replicate those really, really good seasons he had, I mean, he would just be excelling as a number four starter. Now, of course, he's pretty removed from that. That may be a lot to expect out of a guy who just made a few starts at the very end of the year last year, but was basically on the shelf the entire season and has not pitched for a long, long time prior to that. So it's going to be a lot to sort of expect that out of him. But if he could find a way to get back to that, that would just make an outstanding rotation. John Means is really the X factor in this rotation when we're looking at it. I think he is going to have a lot of influence over just how good this starting rotation is. If he does put up a good season, he can really turn this rotation into something that is absolutely stellar. He is, I think, the most unpredictable of any of our starting rotation, and I think he really will make a big difference as to how good this rotation actually is for 2024. Um, but I think that why I'm so confident he'll be in the rotation is because the Orioles have to give him a chance to return to form. If he doesn't do it and we have to find a different role or he gets slid down to the fifth spot or something like that, all those are possibilities that could happen. But this team has to allow John Means to return to form and see what he can do, because there is too much potential to not give a full opportunity to, if he were to find a way to be the old John Means that we know that he can be. So I'm very confident that he's going to hold the number four spot down in the rotation. And sort of for a different reason, I think Dean Kramer is almost certainly going to be the five starter in the rotation. And actually for a very different reason than why I think Means will be the four starter. But basically, I think Kramer will be the five starter because he's too reliable. On this podcast, I think we've referred to him as the perfect number five starter. And he basically is. He pitched 170 plus innings for us last year with around a 4 ERA, and 170 innings is, especially in this day and age, is great for a starting pitcher. For a number five starter, it's even better, and that is particularly outstanding. His 4 ERA is fine, more than good enough. And he has some real stretches while he's pitching where he does do really well. So there were multiple times he strung together five starts last year where it would seem like he went 6, 7 innings, 1, 2 runs, something like that, on a consistent basis for a few starts in a row. This 170 innings also, he wasn't a five for us last year, at least most of the year. If everyone remembers, he was our number three pitcher when it got to the playoffs, and of course he didn't do very well. And that's forgettable. And of course, we would like to attribute that to something like fatigue. Hopefully, that's it. Or it was something like to the effect of him tipping pitches. That was a theory Tyler presented, which was definitely a possibility. But theoretically, if he were to get pushed down from the four or to the five spot in the rotation, that 170 plus innings he pitched last year potentially has a possibility of growing a little bit for the upcoming year. If you take a game, for instance, that uh, Kramer was pitching in last year as the fourth starter, and it was a 1-1 game heading into the seventh, Hyde may pull him out in a situation like that, right? Because it's a close game and we don't want to allow the leadoff guy to get on or something like that. But if he is now the five starter in the rotation, and because the O's were hitting against a weaker opposing pitcher, and they now have a 4-1 lead instead of a 1-1 tie game, right? That might allow Hyde in certain situations to give Kramer a longer leash. So even though 170 innings is great, and if he just replicated that as the five starter, I think all Oriole fans, we would take that. We would be more than happy for that. But I even think that 170 innings has a little bit of room to grow. Now, of course, I will say it is worth saying in order for a starting pitcher to throw 170 innings in a single season, there are a certain number of things that have to go right in order for that to happen. Health being the main one, of course. But even with that said, if he is able to stay healthy, I do think that 170 innings could even expand going into next year. So we will see. But even if he replicated it, even if he has the same exact season that he had last year, that is more than good enough. And because he is such a durable pitcher, I think he is going to be the guy that the Orioles give it to as the number 5 starter come opening day. So, of course, there are a few other considerations, and I'll get into why I think that they won't be in the starting rotation. But if you're looking at some possible considerations, some of these have more of a possibility, but again, I think none of them really have any strong possibility of cracking the starting rotation. And I'll go down and explain why for each of them. But we can look at Tyler Wells, Cade Povich, Chase McDermott, and Cole Irvin. These are guys that theoretically could make the starting rotation, but I do have real reservations about why any of that would happen. So I guess we could start with Tyler Wells. Even though Tyler Wells was nearly an all-star last year, the first half of the season, he didn't make the all-star game, but of course, in the second half, he sort of fell apart. He wore down, fatigue, his body kind of fell apart. And he wasn't able to sustain that over the course of the entire season. So if we're looking at Tyler Wells, he also has had real success in the bullpen historically. Of course, he was closing games for the Orioles. I think even just a couple years ago, he was one of the closers, and he racked up some saves for the Orioles. He can establish himself in many different roles in the bullpen. He could be a long guy for the Orioles that gets spot starts for us, or he could be a back end of the bullpen sort of piece where we call on him in the eighth inning to get some critical outs. Either of those are possibilities, and not only are either of those possibilities, he might do both in this season, or he might do some of everything this upcoming season, where I think he probably is, especially if he is rested. It's toward the beginning of the year. He is stretched out, which I imagine he will be at the beginning of the year. I think Tyler Wells is first in line to make a spot start, but because Means and Kramer are more true starters, and because Tyler Wells has this versatility about him, I think Kramer could be a bullpen piece theoretically. But he hasn't proven that, especially not to the degree and not to the usefulness and utility that Tyler Wells has proven his ability to be a bullpen piece. Means and Kramer are sort of more true starters than Wells is. So, and they don't have any bullpen experience for the most part. So, I mean, I'm not discounting the possibility they got into a game or something out of the bullpen, but overall, they don't have any bullpen experience. And as opposed to Wells, who does and who's very good in the bullpen and has been good in the bullpen. That's why I feel very, very confident that it's going to be Means and Kramer that get those starting roles, and Wells will be put in the bullpen, and then maybe occasionally getting spot starts over the course of the year. So moving on to Cade Povich, obviously Cade Povich is a real talent. He's one of the best Oriole prospects. And when I say that, obviously we have a lot of really good prospects, but he is really, really highly esteemed in the Orioles organization. And the reason why Povich, I don't think will make the major league, or I'm sorry, will make the starting rotation out of on opening day is because, I mean, for one, if on a very superficial level, if we just look at his numbers at AAA last year, he had a 5.36 ERA, which is difficult to justify promoting somebody who had a 5.36 ERA last year. He had a bit over a K per inning. In AA, his strikeout numbers were outstanding, of course, and it was much more than just above 1K per inning. But in AAA, it was a little above 1K per inning. But yeah, the 5.36 ERA at AAA, it's even if he comes in and he has a great spring, it's going to be hard to justify booting either Means or Kramer from the rotation in order to insert Povich. And you know, thinking about this Orioles team, this is not an Orioles team of the years past where guys in the minors who weren't really either ready or even talented enough for the majors got promoted to the major leagues due to a lack of depth or desperation out of the Orioles organization. The Orioles have been extremely conservative in accelerating players through the system and promoting guys to the next level. And the Orioles have an expectation that you really need to perform and demonstrate. You basically have to show that there's no room for improvement at the current level you're at before being promoted to the next level. So I don't see somehow Povich making the rotation. Povich is 23 right now. He'll be 24 in April. So there's really no reason to force him up to the majors yet. And of course, everything I'm saying here, there's no reason to be real negative on his long-term outlook. But I feel like it's almost certainly too early for him to hold down a spot in a major league rotation. If we look at Chase McDermott, McDermott is closer to the majors than Povich is, and that makes a lot of sense. He's a year older than Povich, and he did actually pitch well in AAA last year. Although it was 50 innings over across eight starts, and he had 64 Ks in those 50 and two-thirds innings. And he had a 1.01 whip, which is great. And those numbers, if you were directly to take them to the major leagues, I mean, that would be outstanding. Of course, doesn't exactly work like that. But diving a little deeper, the biggest concern is probably the walk rate, which was almost 4.5 per nine, so like one every two innings. Um, so before he comes to the majors, especially as a starter, you would like to see that number drop a bit. And that number translated to the major league level would not be sustainable for long-term success. Obviously, with the plate discipline, the better hitters, etc., it would probably be worse if he was the same pitcher coming up to the major league level. Um, but you think about there are so few pitchers in Major League Baseball and even less starting pitchers that can get away with having a walk rate like that because it amounts to just too much traffic on the bases over the extended number of innings. If you're a reliever and you come in and you allow a walk, you might be able to get around that a lot easier than being a starting pitcher and going out every few innings and having traffic on the bases. Now, McDermott was able to keep his whip so low because he gave up so few hits at AAA. But even despite that, his walk rate was too high. If he cut his walk rate down a lot, he'd have a sub 1 whip. And I mean, that would be a great recipe to be promoted to the major league level. So I think it is reasonable to expect that McDermott will, get some spot starts over the course of this year, and he has numbers that are closer to warranting a promotion than someone like Povich at this point. And it makes sense because he is a year older, so he is a little more primed and ready, I think, to make the majors and to make spot in the rotation. I think it is reasonable to expect that McDermott will get some spot starts over the course of the year. But in terms of making the rotation on opening day, I just can't see him being in the rotation. And then lastly, Cole Irvin. So Cole Irvin, the thing about him, we know what he is. He's a little more volatile for the most part than somebody like Dean Kramer. Um, I don't see him. I think we sort of know what Cole Irvin is at this point. I think he will have a role on the major league team. But in terms of him outcompeting Means or Kramer, for one of the opening day rotation slots, I don't think that is really a possibility. Now, as far as Cole Irvin did have 2 good years for Oakland, where he pitched about 180 innings in each of the 2 years. And he's not too far removed from that. He's only 2 years away from that. The thing about Cole Irvin is that the upside is just not there. I think we sort of know what Cole Irvin is, and there is more. Well, one, there's more possibility, I think, that Cole Irvin goes wrong than somebody like Dean Kramer. And the upside for Cole Irvin is not the upside that I think Dean Kramer presents. I I'm not even positive that Dean Kramer like last year performed at the best of his ability. I think he could shave off another half run or so on his ERA, or at least a quarter of a run on his ERA. So I think that's definitely possible for someone like Dean Kramer. But Cole Irvin pitching 180 innings over the course of the year, if he were to do that, and if he were to be able to stay in the rotation long enough to be able to do that, I don't think that at the end of the year he would. I would rather take my chances with Dean Kramer's 180 innings over the course of an entire season that I would go with Cole Irvin's 180 innings over the course of an entire season. So he is a good depth option to have in case the Orioles are in a situation where we face an injury or something like that. But I don't see him taking a spot from Dean Kramer. There is some precedent for this as far as Cole Irvin is concerned. We can look to just last year, and the Orioles preferred Dean Kramer in general over Cole Irvin. Cole Irvin did make 12 starts last year. At certain points, they were sort of rocky, and he struggled a bit. But yeah, we can look to even just last year, and Dean Kramer did not give us any reason last year to not have him be a starter in the rotation this year. So I don't see Cole Irvin taking Dean Kramer's spot as far as a starting pitcher this upcoming year. So just sort of concluding the starting rotation, just thinking about these 5 spots, it's sort of the combination of the upside and potential of Means and the durability of Dean Kramer, and sort of the lack of options of guys that are sort of pushing up against him. Wells makes too much sense in the bullpen in a way that the other guys don't. and Povich and McDermott are just a little too far away. And Cole Irvin, compared to someone like Dean Kramer, is just not the caliber of pitcher where I think he's gonna overtake Dean Kramer in a rotation. So it's those it's those things in combination with each other that make me as confident as I am that it is going to be Burns, Bradish, Rodriguez, Means, and Kramer as the five starting pitchers on opening day. So if you're looking at the Zips projections as an Oriole fan, it can be a little difficult to look at. I don't want Oriole fans to get too discouraged looking at the Zip projections. It is really important to keep in mind that the Zips projections looks at uh, Oriole pitchers the last few years, and all pitchers and all players when they're making their assessments. They look at their stats over the last few years. And of course, they weight the more recent years than the previous years. But if, for instance, somebody has a breakout year and they are fundamentally a different player or a different pitcher in this case, because that's what we're talking about. If they are a different pitcher than they were the prior years, well, that's not really going to be accounted for in the Zips projection. And somebody like Kyle Bradish, who had a breakout season last year with the Orioles, and even looking at someone like Grayson Rodriguez, who it's not really fair to say he had a breakout season last year, but he definitely had a breakout second half of the season last year. If you're looking at a couple guys like that, who the Orioles definitely coming up are going to be so reliant on in the starting rotation this upcoming year. If you look at Zip projections for players and pitchers like them, they're not going to look at them too favorably. Now, granted, Oriole fans are banking on the fact that Bradish is fundamentally a different pitcher, which I think he is than he was 2 years ago. And we are banking on the fact that somebody like Grayson Rodriguez can put together a full season, somewhat resembling the second half of what he had last year. So the Orioles fans, in order for our rotation to be really good, we sort of need those things to happen. And we can't have, if people like Bradish or Rodriguez sort of revert to what their Zips projection is going to be for the upcoming year, then this rotation might not be as glowing as we hope it will be. I think that it is important to not get overly concerned with the Zips projection because I think the Oriole pitchers have changed. They sort of have evolved into new pitchers. So I think emphasizing those previous years where they were still learning and still trying to find their way in the major leagues isn't that useful and isn't that helpful for thinking about what the Orioles rotation will do this upcoming year. Now, with that said, even though I do have a lot of optimism about the rotation this upcoming year, we are also hoping that these young pitchers sort of do perform to the level of their peaks or of what they are really, really capable of, and don't revert too much below that boundary. Of course, I think Bradish, we can expect a little regression with him this year. Maybe he's not going to have under a 3 ERA like he did last year, but it'll be 3.20 or 3.15 or something like that. We could definitely handle that and deal with that and adapt. And that's not going to be too much of a setback for the Orioles if that's the kind of pitcher he is this upcoming year. But as far as Grayson Rodriguez, I know I said Means was the X factor. Grayson Rodriguez is, I would say, the second X factor in the Orioles rotation behind John Means. Grayson Rodriguez, he had a great second half. We know what he's capable of. We've seen him pitch when he's really, really good. But it's really about him staying healthy over the course of the year. And then basically being able to perform how we know he's able to over the course of the year. Without having, it's okay if he has a bad start here and there, or on occasion, but we can't be looking at a month or a couple months of a bad Grayson Rodriguez without starting to wonder or think about if this Orioles rotation will live up to what we're hoping that it will. If you think about some of the other rotations in the major leagues, you look at like the Dodgers, and they're probably going to have Yamamoto and Bueller and Miller and Glass now, right? You look at the Braves, who are also excellent, right? And they're going to have Max Fried and Charlie Morton and probably Chris Sale and Bryce Elder and Ian Anderson. So when we're thinking about, what are the stellar rotations in the major leagues, there's not a big drop off when thinking about, our rotation as opposed to some, the Dodgers or even the Braves. I mean, this could be a really, really good rotation. The Orioles last year were 11th in ERA for starting pitchers last year. We had a 4.14 overall, 4.14 ERA overall. So we were like the top half of the league, almost the top third of the league last year. Um, and last year, the strength of the pitching staff was really the bullpen. And we are thinking that that will probably be reversed this upcoming year, in large part because of the loss of Bautista, and we traded DL Hall, who we expected to be really, really useful for the Orioles this year. But we also, of course, added Corbin Burns. So, we really are thinking that the Orioles starting pitching is going to be the big strength of the pitching this year. And hopefully we're going to have guys that go deeper into games. Hopefully we pitch more innings as a starting rotation than we did last year. I think that's a reasonable expectation, especially with the addition of Burns, who is going to eat close to 200 innings if things go well and barring injury. Um, so yeah, just sort of thinking about that, I think it's reasonable to hope and to expect that with the addition of Burns, with a full season of Grayson Rodriguez having become the pitcher that he sort of is and can be, and the return of a productive and healthy John Means, I think it could very well be a top 5 starting rotation in the major leagues. I also don't want to underestimate sort of the Orioles' ability, if there is injuries and stuff like this, to sort of adapt to the situation. Tyler Wells can be a very useful addition to the starting rotation if necessary. I think if all of these 5 opening day starters throw from 150 to 180 innings for us this upcoming year, I think that we definitely are in prime position to be a top 5 rotation in the major leagues. And that might be underdoing it a bit. That might be underselling it a bit. It could be a top 3 rotation in the major leagues. That is very, very possible. Now, of course, that's sort of, you could argue, well, if all of our top 5 pitchers stay healthy the whole year and throw X number of innings, right? I get that. And that might not be realistic to expect John Means to throw 150 innings this upcoming year, even though that would be fantastic if he did. But I'm just sort of giving an outline and a recipe for how the Orioles could be able to break into that top 5 and establish themselves as a dominant starting rotation this upcoming year. If things go wrong and the Orioles don't end up cracking the top 5, I think definitely it's pretty safe to assume we're going to be in the top 10, given that we were 11th last year and given that we have these young guys we expect to make improvements. Obviously, I talked about Bradish potentially regressing a tiny bit, but overall, over the course of the season, I think it's very fair to say that Grayson Rodriguez will have a better year than he did last year. Thinking about the return of John Means, um, I think there's a lot of reason for optimism for this rotation and for improvement. So I think saying that the Orioles will be a top 10 starting rotation is pretty safe to assume, barring some sort of disaster. If the Orioles are not in the top 10 in starting rotation by the end of the year, something will have gone tragically, tragically wrong for this starting rotation. The scenario in which the Orioles don't make the top five starting rotation is, yeah, if John Means gets hurt almost immediately in a situation like this, if John Means is out in May for the rest of the year or something like that, or if Grayson Rodriguez goes out or gets injured for a month or two, if these five have IL stints that are 2 weeks or 3 weeks tops or something like that, I think the Orioles are in a great position to fill those holes. And assuming they don't happen, multiple don't happen at the same time, I think the Orioles are in great position to sort of adapt to a situation like that, um, and sort of sustain the success of the starting pitching. It's sort of where, okay, John Means is actually not reliable this year, so we just sort of X him out of the rotation, and then Grayson Rodriguez either gets hurt for a month or two or is out for a month or two, and then has another month or something like that where he's sort of the first half Grayson Rodriguez instead of the second half Grayson Rodriguez. Now you can start to see sort of a situation where, okay, our 3 and our 4 starter isn't really where we expected and hoped that they would be. And now, we have to start considering other options. But short of Corbin Burns hurting himself or Kyle Bradish hurting himself for an extended period of time this upcoming year, the Orioles are in a really, really great position to have an outstanding starting rotation. I am very, very hopeful that this rotation will crack the top five. I think it is uh, a real underestimate to say they'll be in the top 10 of the league. I think that would be a very, very safe prediction to make for the upcoming year. But in terms of the Orioles being the top 5 rotation, I think that is very much a conversation. And that might be if things go really, really well. And we maintain health, all those guys throw 150, 170, 180, or Burns maybe close to 200 innings. I think we're now in the conversation at that point of having a top 1, top 2, top 3 rotation this upcoming year. And it's really, really exciting. And thinking about just this year, obviously Corbin Burns is a solution for this year. Maybe we'll resign him. I would say that's probably not likely to happen, but it is possible. But Corbin Burns, having him this year, thinking about the possibility of this rotation, thinking about the possibility of these guys, Povich and McDermott, a couple years down the road, and how we can integrate them potentially in the future into the starting rotation, holding down permanent spots in the rotation, plus the improvement and refining of Rodriguez and Bradish. I mean, this rotation has the making of being a very, very good rotation for years to come, which is really, really exciting. And the fact that we are so good, I mean, we're talking about the Orioles potentially being a top 5 rotation, and our number 2 and 3 starters are have pitched a couple years in the major leagues, and they're going to be here for a long time, hopefully. So it's really, really exciting. Yeah, I would say that I would expect by the end of the year, hopefully, that the Orioles crack the top 5, stretching. Hopefully, we get into the top 3 starting rotations. But conservative estimate, I would say, yeah, I mean, very, very conservative would say top 10 in the league, but I think even top 7, top 8, I think is very, very reasonable. And that's sort of in a bad case scenario, I think, where, Means gets hurt and then Rodriguez has some sort of issues over the course of the year. Something like that would be a scenario, I think, where the Orioles could falter and fall down a bit. But if guys stay healthy, if guys are really, really performing how we expect them to, they're playing with the confidence that they played with last year. We avoid all the injuries, and it's like a smooth sailing sort of year, sort of like it felt last year, but applied specifically to the starting rotation this year. Sky's the limit for this rotation, and I'm really, really excited, and I think all Oriole fans should be. That'll wrap it up for this episode. Feel free to give us a rating, a review. You can feel free to follow the show at the Warehouse Pod on Twitter and on Instagram. If you want to reach out to the show, feel free to email us at thewarehousepod@gmail.com. Thank you so much, everybody, for listening. This has been the Warehouse Podcast. My name is Jesse, and go O's.